All right, let's get right into it. You know when you see a headline about some new medical study? Have you ever stopped and wondered, wait a minute, who did they actually study? It's a really important question, and the answer is way more thought out than you might think.
And this gets to the very heart of the matter. Let's imagine a real-world scenario from nursing research. You've got a study on just 400 diabetic patients, but the conclusions are supposed to apply to all 77 million diabetic patients in a country. I mean, how on earth is that possible? You can't just talk to everyone, right?
Well, the simple answer is, you're right, you can't. Studying an entire population is pretty much a logistical nightmare. It would take way too much time, cost an absolute fortune, and you'd need a massive team. So instead of just throwing their hands up, researchers came up with a really clever and systematic way around this problem.
And that workaround? It all starts by splitting the idea of a population into two very different groups. You've got the group they dream of studying, and then you've got the group they can actually get their hands on. This is the key idea we're going to break down.
So have a look at this. On one side, you have the target population. Think of this as the ideal group, the big dream. And on the other side, you have the accessible population. This is the available group, the practical reality of who's actually within reach for the study.
Let's put a slightly more formal definition on that. The target population, which is sometimes even called the universe, is the entire group of people or even things that the researcher wants their findings to apply to in the end. It's the grand ambition of the whole project.
And to make this crystal clear, let's stick with our diabetes example. The target population is all adult patients with type 2 diabetes in India. That's every single one of those 77 million people. This is that vast, scattered universe that we ultimately want to understand.
Okay, so that's the dream. Now let's bring it back down to Earth. The accessible population, also called the source, is the slice of that giant universe that a researcher can actually get to. It's shaped by all those real-world limits like geography, money, and just getting permission.
So for our study, the accessible population isn't all 77 million patients spread across India. Nope. Instead, it might be the diabetic patients who go to a few specific selected hospitals in major cities like Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore. See? A lot more manageable, isn't it?
This table here really just lays it all out. Look at the scope. The target population is that broad, theoretical universe, while the accessible one is the narrow, practical source. And their goals are totally different. We want to apply our findings to the target group, but we have to pick our participants from the accessible group. And why? Because of those real-world constraints: time, money, and access.
Okay, so with that huge difference between the dream and the reality locked in, how do researchers actually get from one to the other? Well, you can think of the whole process like a funnel. They start with that massive universe and systematically narrow it down step by step until they have their final study group.
And this diagram shows that funnel perfectly. This is basically the roadmap researchers follow. You can see how we start at the top with that huge circle, the target population, and we work our way down through the layers to that tiny little circle at the bottom, which is the final sample.
Now, let's put some numbers on this to see just how dramatic the narrowing is. Step 1, you've got the target population, our 77 million people. Then we funnel down to the accessible population. Maybe that's 50,000 patients in those few big city hospitals. Step 3, the sampling frame, a real list like a hospital registry, which might have 25,000 of those patients on it. And finally, from that list, we pull our study sample, the final 400 people. I mean, think about that, from 77 million all the way down to 400. Every single step is a deliberate cut.
And let's just zoom in on that term from the funnel, the sampling frame. This isn't just some abstract idea. It's the actual physical list of every single person in that accessible population. You know, like a hospital's patient registry or a directory of nurses. This list is the critical link that lets researchers go from their available group to picking out the final few for the study.
So, after all that careful, meticulous narrowing, why even do it? What's the big payoff? Well, it all comes down to one incredibly powerful idea: generalization. This is how the findings from just 400 people can speak for and speak loudly about the millions they represent.
Think of it like a journey back up the funnel. First, the results from that 400-person sample are statistically applied, or generalized, back to the accessible population they came from. Then, and this is the big leap of faith really, researchers can logically infer that those same results also apply to the massive target population, that whole universe they wanted to understand from the start.
But
And this is a huge but. This whole process hinges on one critical thing. The accessible group, the patients in those few city hospitals, has to be a good reflection of the entire target population across the country. They have to be representative. If they aren't similar, the whole thing just falls apart.
And that, of course, leads us to the final critical question. What happens if the available group, the people researchers can easily reach, isn't truly like the ideal group? What if those city patients are, say, wealthier or have better health care than the average person in a small town? What happens then? Well, that's where things get tricky, and it's something to definitely keep in mind the next time you see one of those headlines.